After you get to AutoCAD, your objective will be essentially to post-process the information into a readable format. So for me, it looks like I'm just now realizing that my site plan is the wrong scale. So I believe this distance was actually supposed to be 216 feet. So I'm going to move this out of the way here and scale it up to get it to be correct. So I go from here, change it to a referential scale, and then I go from there to there, and I tell it to go 216 feet. And I'm pretty sure I showed you guys referential scales, how to scale and then scale by reference distance at some point. If not, I'll go through it in more detail later on. So what we have here is it looks like, the way I do it is I separate my actual cut lines from the lines that are in the background, because once you get like a really intense model in place, you'll see that you've got a lot of stuff going on. So you might have, your background like this with your door swings that look kind of like this.
It's really hard to see that color.
The color's hard to see. Oh yeah, that is. Okay, I'll change it to something else. Thank you for telling me. Is green better?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So it might look a little bit like this, and then these are essentially door swings, and there might be handrails. And right now I'm just kind of spitballing about what information could potentially be present in your drawing. And I'm trying to just show that there could be a lot of entourage behind the actual cut that you're trying to make, right? So this is kind of just trying to simulate that, okay? It's not super accurate, but it's there. So the very simple way of doing it is not to go through and try and hatch through all these, discrepancies between the layers and try and figure out, oh, I got to delete this and get rid of all this other information. In my opinion, the easiest way to do it is to just go into your section and do your hatching there. So the hatching process is pretty simple. Essentially, you're going to have your slabs, your walls, any kind of detail elements. So, for instance, if I had drawn my mullions going the opposite direction, those would be hatched. In fact, I can simulate that later on when we get into more detail. But the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to show my slab as a different hatch than my walls. So I'm going to create two layers for hatching or poche. So I'll call them poche 1 and poche 2.
When you say slab, do you mean like the earth or like
I mean, if you look at this, the slab in this case would be this, and up here as well.
so it's part of the building?
It's part of the building, yeah. Yeah, so it's basically just, if it's like a steel frame construction, the slab is the concrete at the bottom that all the steel will penetrate through to get to, like, creating friction in the ground that keeps it stable or something like that.
Can you use two different poches?
You don't have to. I am, mostly because I want to illustrate how to do shading in different ways, but also because with a very simple building like this, sometimes it's beneficial to show elements in different graphic patterns, essentially. So I have poche 1. Actually, let me change the colors on those. Where are they? Poche 1 is, I'm going to make it cyan, and poche 2 I'll make magenta. Okay, so my slab here, I'm just going to kind of show the landscape configuration that I created as my model as if it was designed to be slab. And then anything that happens to fall below it will essentially be the earth, right? And then these are my walls. In this case, I'm using my walls and my second floor, which would be like a composite construction slab. Um, Technically, it is a slab, but I'm going to show that in the same hatch as the walls. So with Poche 1, because my original surface was a singular offset surface that was closed, I don't have to do anything to that. It's perfectly intact and it looks fine like this. So I go to hatch, and then I set my settings. So I'm going to go to solid, which makes it easy because none of this other stuff really applies right now anyway. And I click. Okay, so that fills it in. I'm noticing here that, for whatever reason, I forgot to do an offset surface on one of my edges of the building. So now that I'm already in the post-production stage, if you realize that there's a gap in your modeling like that, it probably makes sense, or at least it does for me right now, to just draw it into AutoCAD rather than modeling it. So I'm kind of glad that I didn't do this. But now that I can show you this. But you just go back to the layer and you just start finishing it off. So I think these were 6-inch. Yeah. And you can just go through and model it to completion. So I just deleted that. I'm going to do trim and get rid of that extra edge. Not that it really matters. Okay, so now I've got my complete wall configuration. And I've got Poche 2 that I'm selecting. And I'm going to do a hatch on both of those as well.
So hatch is Poche?
Yeah. Yeah. So for me then, I pretty much have the regular solid hatches ready to go. And I want to start to create the environment that's going to happen beneath the building. So in fact, I think what I want to do is create a layer for earth. And this one I am going to make blue. But the earth hatch looks a little bit different. In this case, they're using just a regular crosshatch. In many cases, it will show up. Well, I'll show you kind of what it looks like. But I'm oversimplifying this. I don't have a structural foundation underneath. It's just a slab. You'll see much more intriguing structural conditions. But oftentimes what happens is there will be a pattern or sort of just kind of like a jagged line that gets placed around foundation components, kind of like that. And so, arbitrary. It's just a graphic representation. So it's just showing the extents of, and that gets taken away later on. And I'll show you what I mean. So I go onto the earth layer, and the hatch command, which also is located right there if you don't want to type it in. You'll see here that these patterns, there are a lot of patterns. And what you saw in the example drawing was actually just a crosshatch that looks like that. But you've got concrete and different brick patterns, and you've got steel cuts, glass cuts, sand, which is used for like the top pattern of a sidewalk. But this is earth. Earth is a series of pair or groups of 3 lines that are just kind of like I forget if it's parquet or parquet, but it's like a parquet pattern that just gets turned every quadrant. So that pattern gets applied in this location, but it shows up as a solid blue. It shows up as a solid blue because right now the scale is really, 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 really tiny. I don't even know if we can see it if we zoom in. Oh, I didn't complete the command. That's why. So you zoom in. Yeah, it's probably way too small to show it. So what you have to do is you can just click on the pattern. It selects it. And you go up to the settings here. Right, so everything we've done so far has been solid, so we haven't had to play with the settings. But you'll see here that there's this little square within a square. That's the hatch pattern scale. You can change that scale up to, well, I have no idea what scale it's going to need to be, but I'll try 50. 50 got me close. Now it looks like this. In fact, I probably want to go a little bit larger, so I'll make it 75. And I'll work with that for now. So I don't need this line anymore. Okay, so that pattern, oh, also, as a personal preference, I like to turn it on a 45-degree angle. A lot of people don't do that. I do. But I just, so what we've just done, oh, that's really hard to see even like that. That blue just doesn't show up on this projector. I'll make it yellow. Does that show up? Yeah. Okay, so that simulates the, porous nature of Earth. Essentially just dirt or, soil underneath the building. So what you will find is that in regular buildings, if it has like a stem wall foundation, then those come down and it would actually, the pattern would dip around it. And it just shows like a simplified graphic to differentiate what is actual building and what is, the natural earth, and what is void is essentially built space. So that's what we're getting at here. So that's kind of just the first basic hatch pattern lesson that I can bestow upon you. Okay, so the next step is going to be, well, how do we actually get into the drawing, collapse it with its multiple layers, and then show transparency, which is really important. So what questions do you have about this so far?